Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Ida Rademacher. I co-lead the Financial Security Program at the Aspen Institute, and it's my privilege to be hosting today from the Aspen Institute campus in Colorado for the kickoff of our Future of Wealth discussion series. The goal with this series is to put a platform under, maybe put a spotlight on the research, the ideas, the innovators across the country, across sectors, who are informing and inspiring our work to reimagine and hopefully to bring forth a future of wealth in America that reflects a more deeply shared prosperity across race, across gender, across geography, and across generations. Last month at the Aspen Ideas Festival, we published the New Wealth Agenda, which was the culminating report in a 2-year investigation into the most potent solutions that we have found research on that we think have the potential to spearhead a whole new era of inclusive wealth creation in the United States. The report distills 8 strategies that our research suggests has the strongest impact on measurably and meaningfully growing the wealth and financial security of Americans. And importantly, each of those strategies implemented at scale would be a powerful means of addressing and ameliorating historic disparities in our country. So we're kicking off the series today with that focus on one of those really potent solutions, the idea of startup capital for life or net worth at birth. What would it look like and what would it take for kids as they grow to adulthood to have no harmful debt and an investable sum of money to help them get started in life in an affordable way. And I'm sorry, we're live here in Aspen, and it seems that they're testing a video right behind me. So I will just keep going here. I'm going to go forward and say, please read that report. We're going to put links below. But today we're really going to focus specifically on startup capital for life. And the reason we're doing that is twofold. The other report that we put out recently, Early Wealth Building Accounts, kind of talked specifically about the problem generationally with wealth in America today. This is the first time in the history of our collection of data in America where we can see that the next generation, in terms of wealth and financial security, is not on a trajectory to be better off than those prior. That has huge consequences for our economy, for our democracy, for the well-being of our families. And so these early wealth building accounts, whether they're children's savings accounts, baby bond programs, they've been piloted and studied for decades in America. Indeed, they've been happening all over the world. But we're really hitting a momentum opportunity here for us to put our arms around this strategy and look at what it would really take for this investment to take hold in this country. I'm going to stop there and say, stay tuned for the entire conversation. Next, I'm going to just stop so we can play an incredible clip discussing with 2 leaders, 2 U.S. senators, Cory Booker and Bob Casey, who are real champions of children's savings and baby bond accounts. We'll listen to them talk to my co-lead, Joanna Smith-Romani, and then I'll come back in and introduce our panel for an incredible conversation about the way that we go forward with this idea in a big way in America.
Hello, everyone. I am Joanna Smith-Romani, the co-executive director of the Financial Security Program of the Aspen Institute. And to say that I am delighted, thrilled, excited, I don't even know the words to use, that I have 2 amazing U.S. senators in this conversation with us about early wealth building and startup capital for life would be an understatement of what a big deal it is. We have Senator Casey from Pennsylvania, Senator Booker from New Jersey. These are folks who you know, but who also have long lists of priority items and agendas, and they are carving out not just time from their day to day to talk to us about startup capital for life and early wealth building, but they're carving out part of their policy agenda to make this a reality for children across our country. So we're going to talk about this a little bit today, senators. again, like truly, truly from the Aspen Financial Security Program and from all of our viewers, thank you so much for your attention to this urgent issue and for spending time with us today to let us know what's on your mind about it. I'm going to start with you first, Senator Casey, and ask from your perspective, this is now sort of multiple legislative sessions. You're trying to get real important substantive legislation moving on this. Why is investing in early wealth building, really meaningful sums of money for the smallest of our community members, an important wealth building strategy for you? Why is it high on your list of policy objectives?
Joanna, thanks so much for your time and for the opportunity that Aspen's providing both Senator Booker and me. And I'm grateful to be working with Corey on so many important issues for our country. And this is one of them. And no one has been a stronger advocate for our kids than Corey Booker, way back from his days as mayor and even long before that.
First of all, I want to interject here that's a lie. I've never seen Casey live before. There is one person who has been a stronger advocate for kids than me, and that is Bob Casey. That's the last time I'll interject. Your time. I see my time.
Well, let me just say it's the perfect combination then of two people who truly have committed their careers to our country.
There's no way that's a lie.
Well, so tell me what's on your mind about it then, Senator Casey. Why this particular part of a young person's life?
Let me tell you how I arrived at this.
Yeah, thank you.
In the early part of just before COVID, about a month before COVID, I unveiled a proposal, kind of an overarching proposal for our children. I called it 5 freedoms for America's children. The freedom to be economically secure is one of them. That's what we're talking about today.
Yeah.
But the freedom to be healthy, the freedom to learn, the freedom from hunger, and the freedom to be safe from harm. And that first freedom, the freedom to be economically secure, can't be arrived at, can't be achieved for so many American children because they don't have any wealth to start with,
right,
nor do their parents, nor does anyone around them. So I believe that every child in the country should have the opportunity, the shot for economic security and to earn a living wage when they reach adulthood. Giving every child a savings account that's seeded with money gives them, and I would argue seeded with federal money, gives them something to live for. It literally gives them more control over their economic future, their economic destiny. Here's some of the numbers which many of you are familiar with. Almost half of American children are unlikely to have meaningful wealth by early adulthood. A quarter of American households have less than $1,000 in wealth. And these children's savings accounts break that cycle that you all know so much about, so that young person, when they reach adulthood, can have some resources to be able to attend college, start a business, or to buy their first home. So it's really about giving children the kind of freedom that we claim to be espousing here in America.
Well, thank you. And I think having that also connects to the other freedoms, really the ability to even then realize those other freedoms that you have brought up in the 5 freedoms. Senator Booker, what does it mean for you, Startup Capital for Life? In hearing about how Senator Casey came to this and the work, as he mentioned, you did as mayor of Newark, and how does this connect to kind of the broader way you see young people growing into adulthood and thriving?
Look, it may sound like we were joking back and forth, but the truth is, Bob Casey, even when I was a mayor, was leading in this space in the United States Congress and making the very logical, evidence-based assertion that in a global knowledge-based economy now, the greatest natural resource that any nation has is the genius of their children. Yeah. And the more our children can cultivate their unique gifts and their genius, the better the nation does. But when you have children in a country like ours, that we leave so many of our children on the sidelines, and by that I mean the economic sidelines, by that I mean poverty.
Yeah.
We so much of our wealth on the sidelines that we as a society as a whole miss out on that wealth. And so Senator Casey has been looking at ways to cultivate that genius. He's one of the champions we have on, again, evidence-based things: invest in childcare, invest in paid family leave. Yes. But we know in a capitalist society that wealth begets wealth. And when you have a child, by the time they turn 18, instead of sending them into deep troughs of debt, could actually set them up to invest in a college education, invest in skills training or apprenticeship programs, invest in buying a home, the things that we know create generational wealth, then that wealth multiplies to us all.
That's really exciting. Say more about how you see this, Senator Booker, creating generational wealth, or a little more even about how the proposals are slightly different, but ultimately they have the same values and goals that we've been talking about here, which is every child being able to fully realize their potential and contributions in our country, right? Like we are missing so much creative potential. We're missing so much contribution because, as you said, Senator Booker, we're leaving kids on the sidelines here. What parts of the intergenerational wealth do you think are solved or made better? You know, these huge gaps in intergenerational wealth as a result of these accounts.
Well, first of all, you know, poverty has costs, and Senator Casey and I were two people who fought to get the expansion of the child tax credit, which lifted 40-50% of our families above the poverty line. Every dollar spent to get a child above the poverty line returns $3-4 back to our economy in terms of that child's growth. But this idea of the savings accounts that both Senator Casey and I believe in, by the time a child can reach 18 years old, and they can have in our baby bonds bill up to $48,000. That's a pretty stunning amount of wealth.
Very much.
At a very low cost when it comes to how we already use our tax code to shift wealth upwards. I am all for 529 accounts. I'm all for the mortgage interest deduction. But we have to understand that the top quintile of our wealth in our country, the top quintile uses the overwhelming majority of that tax expenditure. So we are spending over $600 to $700 billion dollars a year moving wealth upwards through our tax code. Why not do something for the children? A fraction of that, 10% or less of that could go into creating these funds, which actually create greater return than some of the other things we do, like carried interest, to shift wealth upwards. And the impact we have seen, first of all, as Columbia University says, it virtually eliminates the racial wealth gap in our nation. It's not speaking in any way towards race in the design of the program, but the outcome is this incredible leveling where all kids are getting more of a level playing field in order to invest in the future. And again, the multiplier effect, all the studies show that in a capitalist society, it takes wealth to create wealth. Well, if you give kids at 18 a seed capital, which in a sense is inherited generational wealth from the wealth of this nation, they are able to roll that into things that sustain generational wealth and create an expansion of opportunity and get, again, people off the sideline and into the game of our economy better.
And for you, Senator Casey, is that partly what pulled you into, again, a career of really looking after America's children? And you said to yourself, we actually need like a financial mechanism to make this happen differently. So what feels unique, special, like the different opportunity in this idea alongside the other ways we're trying to help children in this country?
Well, I think that the opportunity, as Senator Booker made reference to be transformational, to finally say that we're not just going to have a lot of rhetoric, which we've had in Washington for decades about children, and finally do something to move the needle substantially in their direction. I think the child tax credit was a good example of that. We should do it again, the enhanced version of it, which was transformative in a matter of months. I don't think anything we did in 50 years had as much impact as that. And I think there are some good models out there already. We know, for example, my bill focuses on utilizing some of the existing structures and templates and players really that have been in this space for a while, whether it's asset investors or financial planners, state governments that have been running 529 plans for years. And to make sure that we have a focus on lower income families who don't have any opportunity to get even a foothold in terms of their financial future.
I think that your points about the design and kind of who it's for, both you, Senator Casey, and Senator Booker have talked about. I have to wrap us up, which gives me great pain because I have a million more questions to ask you guys about this and the deep kind of technical knowledge you both have spent learning to, again, to really improve our children's futures and lives. And I'm so grateful for it. But so that you can get back to your other jobs, your day jobs, your senator jobs, let me wrap us up with this last question. And maybe we'll start with you, Senator Casey, and round it out with you, Senator Booker. But watching on, we're pre-recording, but there's going to be a live event that's happening around this conversation, really focused on innovations in early wealth building and startup capital for life. And so you are having viewers who can do something alongside of you. And I'm asking you for action steps. What do you need us to do? Who are the sectors you need involved? What can we do? Because we share your vision and commitment for America's youth. So take us out with that call to action. And again, I'll start with you, Senator Casey, and round out with Senator Booker.
I would say keep doing what so many who will be paying attention to this have been doing, bringing ideas to us, helping us work through the policy, but help us make the case to both parties in Congress, both houses. This cannot be done with one party. It has to be done in a bipartisan fashion. I think there's a strong impetus on the Republican side in the Senate for something like this, but we've got a lot of work to do to get that bipartisan support we're going to need. And sometimes that isn't simply talking to members of Congress directly, it's talking to the folks that support them, the grassroots or others who support them. And so making the case for the imperative to give children the full measure of freedom, not just because it's an American ideal, but because it literally will ensure our economic future in addition to the future of that one child.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. Senator Booker?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you and the Aspen Institute for having Senator Casey and myself on. I want to thank Senator Casey, who's really been an ignition point for a lot of these ideas in Congress. And so that's what I would say to folks. If you want an action step right now, is to understand that policy matters. Policy matters. What you are being able to articulate, don't just say we need to do something about child poverty, know the policy. And the great thing about things like baby bonds is it's catching momentum. DC, California, Connecticut, because policymakers have been working with thought leaders to actually turn ideas into action. This is how we got the GI Bill. What a generational wealth creator. This is how we got programs everywhere from the HUD and the FHA programs that help the boom of our building, of our housing booms that help create generational wealth, to even the explosion of industry all throughout the United States. It's been because folks like who are listening to my voice right now didn't just say, oh, this is really nice. I'm going to get behind ideas that matter. And this is a great idea. It should be a birthright in the United States of America. If you're born here, we are going to invest in you. Just the psychology of that alone, we know from the studies shows that children knowing there's an investment account increases their chance of going to college 400%. It's stunning. And that's what we need to know, that this is a community of people, this great nation that believes in all of its children, regardless of your background. We're investing in you. It is a policy that can make a transformative change. And let's do something big in our generation, not just draft off of the big policy ideas that became real under our parents' generation.
Thank you. Thank you both for that. And I'll just add my quick call to action that I know you all know from the stakeholders you work with, that one of the most promising parts of this is how multi-sector and stakeholder this is, from financial service industry to advocates to education advocates. All of us know what a child needs to thrive. And so from the Aspen FSP program, the invitation for all sectors to really get involved in the various ways you guys offered up to us, we put out there too. Thank you both for your time. Again, I know you have busy jobs, but your priority on this matter to even show up today, and then of course to do the work that you're doing in the Senate, we have a huge amount of gratitude for. So thank you again, and we are here to support you and to see this moving forward.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye now.
Thanks, Corey.
Thanks, Bob.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I'm going to ask our panel to come on to the screen. I think that's what I'm supposed to do next. I'm looking for my notes there. I'm so excited to look at the chat. happening alongside of us. That was fantastic. As you all just heard, we recorded that last week with the senators. They really wanted to be on the record with what we're hoping is a much more diverse, growing diversity in the kinds of people who are interested in reading about and thinking about the concept, as we said in the notes, that Michael Sheridan first wrote about in Assets in the Poor. You know, what does it really look like to start thinking about using capital markets and using policy to think about more inclusive wealth creation and the design of our policies for a future of America. And I love Senator Casey saying the imperative to give children the full measure of freedom. So we're going to continue that conversation with an incredible set of women, all of us here today, to talk a little bit more about all the different flavors of children's savings accounts and baby bonds that are really taking hold, and start to think about what comes next there. We have Trina Shanks. Professor Shanks is the Harold Johnson Collegiate Professor at the University of Michigan and a dear friend, and it's so good to see you, Trina. Thanks for joining us. We have Hope Wollensack, who's the Executive Director of the Georgia Resilience and Opportunity Fund, the GROW Fund. And Hope was just out here for the Ideas Festival, and it was so great to have you here, Hope. Thanks for joining us. And also Fiona Gregg, who I've known through a few of the iterations of your career, all of which have had a theme of baby bonds and children's savings in some part of our core passion project. But Fiona's now Global Head of Investor Research and Policy at Vanguard, and has just published a paper from yet another institution weighing in on the merits of this idea in ways. So thank you, Fiona, for your time today. Let me just start. This is a really different conversation we're going to have today. I want to, Trina, Dr. Shanks. I want to go to you first, Professor Shanks. I just love saying that. We've heard a lot of terms today. We've said early wealth building accounts. We said baby bonds. We talk about children's savings. We talk about 529s, child development accounts. There's similarities. There's differences. We heard that from the senators as well. But from your perspective, and you've seen the array over time, you've been deeply in this space for many years, and I've learned so much from you. What do you think are the most important features at the core for all of those kinds of accounts? And what would you like to say at the outset just about this overall ecosystem of focus on children and investing in children in this way?
Well, thank you, Ida. First of all, I'd like to thank your team at Aspen for organizing this event and inviting me to take a part in this important and timely conversation. And to answer your question, I'd like to provide a bit of context. So after reaching an all-time low in the 1970s, wealth inequality overall has been increasing since the 1980s. And although now almost everybody knows that there are huge racial disparities in wealth, that there's extreme inequality where the top 1% has so much more than the rest of the distribution, and that our tax code is upside down, in the late 80s, early 90s, this was kind of a new concept. And researchers started making the case for supporting families to change this dynamic. One prominent example is Melvin Oliver and Tom Shapiro's book, Black Wealth, White Wealth. As has been mentioned, Michael Sheridan in 1991 wrote the book Assets in the Poor, and he really made a strong case for progressive, lifelong asset building as a new approach to social welfare policy. But ironically, the initial attempt in terms of policy was time-limited IDA accounts, individual development accounts, just for low to moderate income families, often those who are coming off a TANF. And even though these IDA accounts were important because they shifted the policy conversation from having a bifurcated conversation where social welfare for the poor was about consumption and income support, and higher income families were offered tax rates for asset buildings, really we wanted to do something different. So one of the original ideas that came through a demonstration called SEED, Saving for Education, Entrepreneurship, and Down Payment, was what we called child development accounts as a next generation individual development accounts where you start with young people and you help them build assets for life. Because as all of us know now, 529 plans existed, but they really were the population. Right now, about 18% of 18-year-olds participate, and often those, again, at the high end of the income distribution. So they weren't really a way to reduce racial inequities or overall inequities. And so some experts said, let's find a way to redesign 529s to make them more inclusive. So the SEED demonstration and child development accounts were kind of a reformed 529 plan, even though some worked with just traditional bank accounts. But the reformed 529 plan was a way to have automatic enrollment for every child, either at birth or at preschool or at kindergarten, and to have them have a way to kind of enter this asset building field. And some of the pilot programs in SEED open accounts with as much as $1,000, even though current programs that are now CDAs called child savings accounts.
Hold on one second. Trina, we're having a hard time hearing you. It seems a little garbled and it's important information.
If I get closer, can you hear me better?
That is so much better. Yeah. So just, I think, rewind just a little bit. We'd heard that really running on the rails of 529s, making that more accessible moving forward. And that's really where you started to cut out.
Okay, well, so out of the CDA programs that formed 529 platform, or sometimes a investment account in a savings account in a bank or credit union. Other countries have also tried this if people want to see kind of countrywide approaches that exist in places. When baby bonds came around, the idea really was, hear me better? Okay, you're muted, but
flow and directly into the microphone is working great.
Okay, great. Yeah. So when baby bonds were proposed by Derek Hamilton and Sandy Darity, they really emphasized larger amounts as a way to reduce racial wealth disparities. And the promise of baby bonds is there will be large amounts of money going to low wealth families without requiring personal savings in ways that had a higher likelihood of reducing racial wealth inequities. And so that's kind of the distinction. And if you're going to compare and contrast, I would say child development accounts and CDAs have a longer history. They've been around in visible programs since 2004. And in fact, one of the first municipal programs in San Francisco, the college K2C, kindergarten to college, they graduated their first cohort in the class of 2003. Maine and SEED OK, which is the experimental to design in the SEED demonstration, also have participants that are approaching high school graduation. But CDAs and CSAs have traditionally focused on post-secondary education and had relatively small deposits. And there's also been an emphasis on family savings and introducing households to working with financial institutions. In contrast, baby bonds have been proposed just in the last 2 to 3 years. They tend to have larger amounts, promote annual distributions, often from the federal government, so that when young people reach adulthood, they have tens of thousands of dollars at their disposal as opposed to $2,000 or $3,000. They also aren't only focused on post-secondary education. So I'll stop there and just say that there's lots of ideas out there. I think that Aspen's concept of bringing all these ideas in a nationwide platform where all of the things that have been tried throughout the country can be in one place and have what they call investable sums when young people reach adulthood is a great starting point for this conversation.
Thanks, Trina. The ideas and the hypotheses around that come from, again, a lot of the research you've helped to create that we all lean on in this work. And we're dropping different studies into the chat here, but as somebody who was at Prosperity Now for years, I know that we could actually fill the chat with research that is informing a new set of individuals being interested in this topic. So please feel free to drop research links in. There's many kinds of folks who are new to this idea joining us through the Aspen platform today. So I'm just asking for a little bit. Can you all hear me okay? I'm getting a little feedback. Okay, great. Fiona, let me turn to you because you're sitting in a new seat, not completely new. And one of the first things you chose to really write about was what you see as the potential of of children's savings, of wealth, inclusive wealth building accounts from birth. And I wonder if you might say a little bit more about why you personally think that this idea is compelling, and where you think that the kind of information that you provided on Vanguard's platform might help the conversation move forward.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Ida. Wonderful to be here. Aspen always just does such an extraordinary job in terms of convening policymakers, practitioners, academics. So it was a great conversation already. Yeah, you're right. So I came to Vanguard, and what I learned from first meeting my colleagues is that actually this is a question we've been getting as an institution. There has been an upsurge, as Senator Booker said, of this idea of baby bonds, and but yet there are many questions, right? Who, how much, through what vehicle, contribute over what time, how, all of these kinds of questions. And so basically we thought we would put together our heads, put together our data and our investment thinking to say, all right, can we put forward some facts? Can we put forward some core principles that might inform policymakers and give them a kind of an empirical base with which to think through some of the trade-offs in some of these different design parameters that they're considering? And so, I did find this a compelling question. You're right. I've long had a history of thinking about inclusive wealth building, of thinking about issues of access. And, it's interesting, roughly half, or a little bit less than half of Americans are even invested in the market. And of course, as Senator Booker said, it takes wealth to build wealth, and that's incredibly true in the asset markets. And this has been a very, successful engine of wealth for some, and can be for others, and can be for all. And so what are those core principles that we put down? Number one, provide broad access, and specifically open accounts for all at birth. And I can say, one of the big ahas from digging into the data is that I thought there would be a big difference between high and income and low and income families in terms of when people start, say, a 529 account. But it turns out that across the income spectrum, about half of families are waiting till the kid is the age 3 or more. And so that taught me actually everybody would benefit from being nudged to start this saving and investing journey early. So that's one. Number two, we do have to focus on the low income families and target the amount of money, the public dollars or otherwise, towards lower income families. Why? And that's because when we look at the balances in, say, 529 accounts, when the beneficiary hits 18, we see that families earning $100,000 or more have 2.5 times the amount of money in those accounts compared to families earning less than 50,000. So there is a huge income gradient, not in when people start those accounts, but how much they accumulate in them. And that's really important, because that makes the difference between whether you can afford, 1 or 2 or 3 years worth of college with this kind of money. Third, we turn to the issue of asset allocation, right? We don't want this money just to sit in cash and sort of fumble along. We actually want it to grow. And that's the benefit of thinking about capital markets as an engine for growth for all, is that we can, so what we find is that if we really advocate for using a multi-asset portfolio like that of a 529 type asset allocation, where you're providing broad exposure to stocks and bonds, and not thinking about this exclusively through, say, a treasury. And some of the proposals we've seen have focused more on, say, treasury bonds as opposed to more of a more equity exposure. And the last really comes from our record keeping experience. The last principle is really thinking about aiming for low administrative costs and lifelong engagement of the beneficiary and their family. Why? Vanguard's always been focused on costs and minimizing the cost of investing. Here too, I think thinking about a program at scale that can leverage that scale to minimize costs is important. But it's also incredibly important to think about, how do we engage this family, right? That can be through enabling private contributions. That can be through digital channels. That can be through financial education. That can be through making sure that the use cases of these funds for that child when she becomes 18, that the things for which these funds can be used are relevant to her. Yes, of course, pay for college, buy a home, but possibly also pay for a big medical expense. So those are some of the things. Those are some of the core principles, Ida, that we put down on paper, having realized this wealth of information and data that could be leveraged to this cause. It was a home run issue for me to tackle.
Well, I hope I know we're going to drop your research as well into the mix here. And so there you go. Thank you, Emmy. I would say, for at FSP, as we've been thinking about the future of wealth as a portfolio, and really saying, what does it look like for this to be not a net zero, not a zero sum game, not a zero sum game conversation. How do we look about wealth creation and who actually gets to be part of that story in the future of America? The specific issues of youth and young adults has come up a lot, not only from the role of this particular part of the solution, but just the overall sense of what creates well-being for an opportunity youth, for a rising generation. We just put out a report with the Asset Funders Network and the Young Invincibles called High Stakes, High Reward. Really looked at a financial security framework for youth and young adults. This idea of an investable sum emerged out of that space, right? That no harmful debt and an investable sum. But it's not the only objective. When we tried to push ourselves to say, well, what would be a moonshot for wealth? If you like one that you could measure and hold yourself accountable to. So we kind of reversed the wealth gap conversation and said, what's it going to take to 10x wealth? What would it really take to 10x wealth in 25 years in this country? And clearly, some construct of children's savings baby bond makes the cut on that in a big way. But so does this issue of routinely positive cash flow. There's a whole lot of other, and we'll have the next one of the conversations in this series on the future of wealth will be about financial stability issues. So Hope, I say all of that by way of coming to you because you've been such a pioneer in some of the guaranteed income work and just understanding what the financial stability work is. And I'm wondering, you're now looking at this idea of an investable sum as an additional piece of your programming. And for you, I'm just wondering how that makes sense as a portfolio, why you went in that direction. And you're newer to this conversation about the kind of net worth from birth idea, but kind of why has it captured you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ida, and thank you for having me here today. The Georgia Resilience and Opportunity Fund, or GROW Fund, was really born out of a community-based task force that was looking at the root causes of economic insecurity, in particular here in Atlanta, one of the cities with the lowest economic mobility of any major city in the country. Out of that task force, we talked to folks in communities, we talked to leaders across the community, and this 28-member task force determined that income stabilization was a huge component to financial stability. Obviously, it's a precursor to building wealth. But at the same time, it was not sufficient to build wealth. So from much of that work, we launched our guaranteed income program where we serve over 650 Black women across Georgia. But we always had this eye towards people in communities don't just want to survive, we want to be able to thrive, and we want to be able to truly have the choice and agency to be able to plan for the future. And you need investable sums to do that. Income smoothing or sort of income stabilization is certainly very helpful, but we have to be also thinking beyond that and connecting these conversations between baseline financial security and what can be done to address the massive wealth gaps, especially that Black communities face. So this is really in 2020, when this task force took place, is really when a lot of these ideas started taking root. We started our work by focusing on guaranteed income first, and we were able to launch a program that, again, serves over 650 women in Georgia. And now we're turning towards what can be done to meaningfully progress the wealth conversation. And among the proposals at the table, baby bonds has always stood out because of the large evidence base of what it can do to address wealth gaps, particularly the racial wealth gap. Here nationally, the racial wealth gap is about, the Black-white racial wealth gap is about 1 to 6. Here in Georgia, it is 1 to 8, and in Atlanta, it is 1 to 46. And that is not even the highest in the country for a city, but it is very high. And so at GROW, we really think about what are bold, evidence-based, community-driven solutions that we can bring to the table and meaningfully advance. And baby bonds clearly stands out as one of them. We're working on building a baby bonds program that will provide, it would be an accelerated baby bonds program, about 6 years, that would provide a substantial endowment of about $40,000 to a substantial number of young people. And that would have a research and evaluation aspect that could help to drive some of the learnings around baby bonds, not just over the next 30-year time period, but help us have meaningful insights within 6 to 8 years. We know that the racial wealth gap is, and the challenges our youth are facing are pressing. And so we think 30 years is far too long to wait for substantial learnings. We want to help to expedite that timeline. And we know that this program can be a meaningful part of that. So we're working on building that, but really this came from talking to community members about what would help them not just survive, but be able to transition into thriving.
Thank you. I've had the privilege of sitting at some of the seed research tables, Trina, quite a while ago now. The excitement of seeing a new set of asset managers really start to think about how would you democratize, but also de-risk the idea of asset ownership. And when you look at some of the ways that that wealth gap has widened, if you weren't, to Fiona's point, in the stock, 2,000% growth in the last decade, and home ownership was maybe 500%. My numbers are not exact, but huge orders of magnitude difference. Those are the only two kinds of assets that show up regularly on the balance sheet of the bottom 60-70% of US households, is some level of financial asset, mainly through retirement savings and home equity, neither of which are really built for those liquidity needs of investment earlier in life, for choices around the kinds of economic mobility pathways you're going to take. I'm also recalling from my early kind of just really amazement at this field, at the thoughtfulness of its founding architects, that while pilots are important, and to your point, Hope, they're incredibly important, and the ambition of yours is exciting, policy and something that is at the scale of a national engagement is actually where we need to go with this if we're thinking about real generational wealth creation and breaking the kind of ways that disparities perpetuate in place and the country. At the same time that Seed OK was starting, which was the biggest kind of in the US, the policy imperative in the state of Oklahoma was amazing around a kid for a while at birth, getting this account seeded. It was a policy demonstration. At the same time in the UK, there was a bit of a policy demonstration with the Children's Trust, Trust Fund, and that ended with the change of a political cycle. But those 18-year-olds that in 2000, the individuals in 2002 when that started, that got an account, they all turned 18. They're really, that first cohort is turning 18 this year. And so interestingly, it's a bit of a natural experiment happening in the UK around what happened with those accounts that were actually there. And the reality is that the average market value of those 18-year-olds is roughly $3,000, but they were all relatively passive. There wasn't a lot of engagement, to Fiona's point, in that, or a lot of additional seeding into those accounts. But when you think about the potential in the US, I wonder what you would all say about both. Do we need more data? Do we need, or is there a sense of what do you think would be different in this country if every child actually moved into adulthood with an investable sum? So I'm asking you to project a little bit forward. What might that do for capital markets, Fiona? What might that do for households? What might that do for the well-being and intergenerational mobility possibly? So I'm asking you to dream with me for a minute. And also to say, then what would be on your learning agenda as we get to interrogate and look at places and natural experiments? We have an ability to go back to all of the pilots and seeds and look at them with new eyes as we have new actors coming into this space who are supportive of the idea. So just asking you all to dream with us about the possibilities and the learning agenda here. And Trina, do you want to start?
Sure. I'd like to kind of put a pin in the discussion you said about Seed OK, because that really was a true experiment. And so literally when the kids were 4 years old, when the kids were 8 years old, and now we have another third wave of data showing at each time point what we can learn is what happens with parent expectations, what happens with the social emotional development of young people, what happens with all sorts of things that we can actually test in a very rigorous way. And so I think probably one of the reasons a lot of the state programs that have had a legislation to take on child savings accounts is because of that evidence from SEED. But I think in addition to that very strong evidence, now that we have places like San Francisco and Maine and Indiana and a few other states and Pennsylvania that are coming along, we can actually show what does this do for a population? What happens when a whole community knows that their young people have money in their names? What happens when you put educational programming, community champions around these? So it's not just a concept that you're hoping will happen, or 1,500 young people in Oklahoma, but a whole community has had a chance to think about this and to dream about this and to get excited about this. And particularly for low to moderate income families and children of color who really had zero money in their name for most of their lives, or would have historically. Now what happens when they start being part of this conversation? And that's what I'm excited to learn more about. So yes, we know from SEED OK and from other survey research we've done that it's a positive thing for children and families. But when you have a whole community doing this together, what difference does that make? That's what I want to start to learn about, tap into, and build that national conversation.
Thank you. Fiona, go for it.
Yeah, I would jump in. I mean, so two sets of questions. One is, like Dr. Shank said, I want to know what people are using the money for, right? When she arrives at 18 or when she's eligible to withdraw down on these accounts, what is she using it for? And I think that's incredibly important because, you know, in this country, we wax and wane in terms of being extremely paternalistic about what funds should be for, and extremely, you know, hands off, right? In the COVID experience, actually, we experimented with taking off a lot of red tape around a lot of social programs, allowing people to self-certify what they needed these things for. And I think that experiment was very positive. And so all to say, I would be really interested in what people are using the money for. The other thing is the plumbing of these programs matters extraordinarily, right? And it's not just the economics and the finances and the math, but it's how is it implemented? Who is engaging? Who is participating? Who is actually contributing to these accounts? Who is not? For whom has this been kind of a moment of unengagement? You know, orphaned accounts, accounts that to whom there's no individual paying attention. You know, and that's a real failure of implementation. So I think we need to pay attention to the successes and many failures within these programs where we're observing high engagement and real value, real utility to the family, but also instances where nobody knows about this account and we can't find the individual to whom it belongs. You know, Ida was thinking about the idea of dreaming, and you know, I would think about two things. One is, you know, I've been staring at families' asset allocation over their life cycle and how that differs for low and high income families. And what's really interesting is when you look at middle and high income families, you see over time increasing exposure to all kinds of financial assets, not just cash. You see, you know, equities, bonds, etc. But for low income families, we see this enormous cash drag. I'll call it a cash drag. You know, people remain, all of their assets that they have to their names stay in cash. And that's a risk, right? We are all experiencing a very inflationary environment recently. So maintaining all of those assets in cash actually is a risk in and of its own right. And so maybe it's a very humble aspiration, but that we would allow people to actually protect the value of the money that they have earned, you know, hard earned and saved, is one humble aspiration. But I think a second is, you know, the upside potential here is quite big. And, you know, we did some modeling to where we said, okay, let's imagine you take $1,000 at birth, you invest an additional $1,000 every year, you know, till the person is 17. So you've put in all told $18,000. How much is that then worth when the person is 18? And, you know, if you deploy it in something like a 529 asset allocation, it's worth almost $33,000. If you put it in 100% equities, allowing the government perhaps to take risk, you almost double this money, or you roughly double that money. And that you know, then $36,000, that can literally pay for 2 full years worth of, you know, in-state public 4-year college, Why does that matter? It matters because right now in this country, we're having a huge debate all the way up to the Supreme Court about what? Student loan debt, right? And student loan debt has been one of the fastest rising debt categories in this country. And so when I think about the upside, it's not just relative to some baseline, it's actually relative to some enormous debt overhang that American families are increasingly having to shoulder in light of the rising cost of higher education and other, costs like healthcare. So those are two dreams. One is, avoid the cash drag that I think persists primarily for lower income families, but also realize some of the upside, right, that capital markets delivers for many families and could be a way to avoid debt that has been very costly.
Yeah. I hope I'm going to put a finer point on it for you as I head to you for this. Can you guys hear me? Can I switch devices? Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, great. You're doing this for 600 families or more, and I'm asking you to think about nationally. I'm also know that you're just starting on the research journey to find out what changes for families. So I guess my ask of you is, as you dream with us about what's potential, what do you hope to find out? What's your invitation to other researchers to kind of talk to you all or share, or anybody who's interested in the work that you're doing?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. The first thing we're interested to learn is we know no single policy is going to be a panacea. And so how do policies like baby bonds and guaranteed income actually complement one another? And how does that increase individuals and communities' choice and agency? And how does that even impact their wealth building potential if they have an income floor under them? So that's one thing that we're interested to learn through this program. We also are interested in the use of funds, as Fiona has already described. How does use of funds differ significantly from someone who draws down at age 18 versus age 24? We can imagine probably what those different uses would be, but it would be useful to better understand and also learn from young people. What does wealth building look like for them? And in what ways do our traditionally known wealth accelerators maybe fall short from where young people's interests lie and where they see potential to build wealth? And so expanding that definition of what known wealth accelerators is. And then finally, one thing that we're interested in is what amount is truly meaningful. I think to date, a lot of the payouts from programs have had some limitations, and so they've been a little bit lower. Is $40,000, is $50,000? What is the amount? Is $30,000 a substantial enough amount to help actually move the needle on some of these outcomes, and for who? And how does that amount vary depending on different aspects of family household characteristics? And so those are three of the questions I think that we're reconciling with, and then we invite folks to think with us about, and I see my communications director, Paul, has dropped my info in the chat, that we are inviting people to think with us about. Ultimately, we want to better understand not only how this sets young people up on a better trajectory, but also how can a program be designed in a way that increases equity and that maximally helps to narrow the racial wealth gap and is really supportive of young people in their choice and agency and the communities and families that they come from. So there are a couple other questions that come to mind, but for the sake of time, I'll stop there.
All right. Well, thank you for that. I love the cadence of information coming on. The chats on the last discussion series Aspen hosted was almost as valuable as the conversations that were happening. I actually had to watch it once just to listen to the conversation and once to look at the resources that came through. And I feel like this is going to be another one of those pieces. I saw a couple of questions in the mix. One was around, will this be recorded? Yes, it's being recorded. So hopefully we'll have a lot more folks watching it and thinking with us about what else they'd like to hear about in this space. And, a lot of folks have been talking about the need to really understand different populations and what's real in their lives as they grapple with the existence or the non-existence of an investable sum, right? The possibility of that. And that can't be truer. And that's why we are both, I feel, the potential to invigorate this conversation, which has such a history of research and rigor and vision. I think our excitement at Aspen is about introducing a next generation of a broader set of stakeholders to the possibilities of this work and to make sure that people like Senators Casey and Booker are hearing from folks about their support for ideas like this. I love the idea, Hope, as well, of the ways that we might need to layer strategies on. The more we know about what are the cost and frequency of income and expense shocks in people's lives, and how can we, to the point that you said, and that I often quote Brandy Michaela saying, you know, it wasn't and it's not our penultimate hope for households in America is not that we simply or merely help them manage their risk a little better. That's not how you build that kind of deep enough bench of prosperity where people have the stability to invest in themselves and their families over time in different ways. So I think that we will, you know, just reminds me that the next conversation we will have, and I believe that the date, Emmy's going to drop it in the chat. I believe that we are going to have on September 27th, have that second conversation about income and benefits and financial stability. That is the rock upon which we think that you can build a set of strategies that that have the potential to 10x wealth for households. I see that there's a lot of questions there. Hopefully we'll follow up with some of those. But for now, I just really want to thank the senators again and Joanna for kicking us off. I want to thank the team at FSP that on the backside of this that did so much of the prep to have this conversation feel ready and rightly timed for the place that we're in today. So thank you to everybody for all of it. Join us again for the next one. And I think that's a wrap.
Thank you, Ida.
Thanks, everybody.